is right. Okay. Hi, my name is Katarina Montague. This is my father, Scot Montague. Do you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born January 11, 1959 in the Eisenhower administration, which is a really long time. I grew up in University Park, just north of SMU, in the house that my great-grandmother built in 1934. When my parents moved to Houston in 1994, when they sold the house, they turned it into a pocket park. So when you go by that busy intersection, it's now a park, where our house was. I went to University Park Elementary School. I had the same fourth grade teacher as my father, Miss Cleveland. She was famous for teaching us cursive handwriting with Lindy pens.
What are Lindy pens?
There are these black long ballpoints that I don't know, she must have gotten kickbacks from them or something, I don't know. But anyway, that's what I remember about her class, Lindy pens.
Lindy pens.
And then went to Highland Park High School, graduated in 1977. Was kind of a meh student.
Runs in the family, you know. Yeah.
No, I mean, your mom did graduate third at TAG. But anyway.
Out of like 13 kids. What a baller.
So anyway, so back then to get into UT, you just had to show you were alive, made over 1,000 on the SAT, and then you're admitted to UT. I didn't realize that once you got there that their main goal was to get rid of you, to flunk you out. So that didn't happen, but it was quite a struggle there for a while. But anyway, my main focus was art history and studio art. So I was there in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, so I know a lot of students, I mean, we're all going to college and stuff, but we might be considering studying abroad or maybe taking a year off to go backpacking through Europe. You went backpacking through Europe, correct?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
What do you mean?
Well, I just couldn't be seen backpacking and looking like your usual ugly American, so I thought I'd take a duffel bag and a little plaid handbag type thing.
What a hipster, man. He can't look like everybody else. He has to be his own person with his own little duffel bag. Can't be a backpack because that's too mainstream. Everybody's got a backpack. I have a duffel bag. Good one, Dad.
Yes, well, there were times when I really regretted that.
I bet.
One of the things that I noticed last week when I house managed the world language graduation at SMU, a number of students, when the 40 world language students were graduating, they had a little survey they filled out, and as they walked across stage and stood in front of their adoring parents, they talked about what their best memory was and what their regrets were, and almost all of them said they regretted that they didn't do a semester abroad. So one of the things that she wanted me to talk about was why it's so important to go abroad. Now, of course, I did it differently. Even though I had a friend who was going to Oxford, and I did sit in on a few classes in Oxford, my goal was to kind of go on my own and my own itinerary and follow the way the wind blew.
Hipster.
So I had some friends who lived in England, and I went to stay with them when I first arrived. And it was really such a different world, and it's mainly the smells. It's just small little things that make you see things differently. But before I went in September of 1982, and before that in April, I took a trip to visit a friend in Houston, and I'd never been to a city bigger than Dallas. So until then, I was living in Austin, never been to a city bigger than Houston. So bigger than Dallas. So I go to Houston, which is big, but it's very spread out, but it's not really that impressive. But my friend that I was going to visit in England, he had a friend that was visiting him in Austin, and he was working on his dissertation. So she and I decided we would go to Mexico City together because the job I was working at, the restaurant, closed. So I had some free time because I was moving back to Dallas. So we decided to go to Mexico City, and one of the things you'll never forget is that moment you see your first really big city. Took a train from Nuevo Laredo, and the thing about going into Mexico that was so strange was how when you're on the border, it looks like the United States takes all this trash and shoves it into Mexico. So for right on the border, it is just trash and litter, and then you get into Mexico about 50 or 60 miles in, and all of a sudden you're in the 19th century. And that's not in a bad way, in a very pastoral, elegant, simple type living. And you would go to these cities like San Miguel Allende and San Luis Potosí and just see these beautiful, beautiful little cities. Of course, they're probably pretty big, but the train would go near the square and we'd stop for a few minutes. Just really beautiful. And then arriving into Mexico City, it was such a huge, huge metropolis. And the thing I remember was getting off the train and going to finding where we're going to stay. And there was all this construction on the street late at night. And it was also the first time I'd ever seen walk, don't walk signs that were not walk, don't walk in English. We're so used to it now, but when I was growing up, it was always walk or don't walk. But there it was that or the walking symbol, and that was, I thought, was really unusual and exciting to see. Whereas now it's so commonplace. But anyway, so there I visited Mexico, which is Mexico City, which is one of the largest cities in the world. And then when I went to Europe, I was first place to go was London, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world. It's always good to have friends and to meet people and to go stay there. And one good thing about traveling abroad now with universities is they have things set up to where you can stay reasonably. It's not really that expensive to travel abroad if you're affiliated with university. So I stayed with friends, went to the Tate, the National Gallery, the Greenwich Museum where the prime meridian of the world is, stood on that line like everybody does when they go to England. Saw the Cutty Sark, dry docked, which is a famous clipper ship, even though most people know of it as a Scotch. Anyway, so that was my first few weeks were spent traveling in London and going to museums.
Okay, well, what would you say was the best part about your trip?
Well, as you travel and go to different places, you always like to see new experiences. And one thing that, for me, that was very interesting was as I traveled and I went to Berlin, and I was in West Berlin, and I met some people there at the youth hostel that we were staying at, that I was staying at. And they were from different places in the United States. They were from Iowa and Minnesota. One of them went to Princeton. So we all just kind of got together. We decided we would go into East Berlin for a day, which was kind of what you would do when you go to Berlin. And this is in 1982, so this is pretty much the height of the Cold War. Reagan was in office, so there was the tensions were really high then. So we went to Checkpoint Charlie, which was a really famous place in the American sector, which is where you crossed into East Berlin, and you had to fill out some paperwork, and you had to. There's a minimum amount of money you had to change. So we changed, and we got these silver coins, and they all felt like they were about the quality of the Dave & Buster's token. They were light aluminum, really worthless, but you were given, you had this minimum amount of money, so, and I think it was like $50 or something like that. So we went in, and the first thing that happened to us was this woman started talking to us. I'm like, oh, hey, what are y'all doing? And she was in English, and so we didn't really think much of it. We were just, we want to see that. So she had some suggestions of things to do. So she said, y'all should go see this, and there's this to go see. I know of this really beautiful, these frescoes in this church to go see. And the Soviet Union satellite countries and the socialist system was very, the religion was, there was no religion, it was the state was the religion. So religion was really suppressed. Now, I'm not a religious person, but the one religious moment I've really ever had was going into this church and looking at the frescoes and being a kind of art historian. this man came around the corner and started talking to us, and it really surprised this woman. She didn't expect anyone was there, and he was kind of the caretaker and was very passionate about the museum, about the church and about the frescoes and the community that used to be there, and there were still a few people there, and he talked a little bit about that. You could tell she was getting very kind of agitated about it, but didn't want to really, drag us out of there because everyone was really interested in it. And I just remember seeing that no matter how much suppression that a state puts on their people, there's still people have a way of rising up above that. And that was really probably the one memory of that was no matter how much people would come and try to control what you observed and what you saw, you still observed and saw really interesting things. And then one of the things about when I traveled, I would always get sodas or something. Now, I don't remember if there were Coca-Colas in East Berlin, but I really had to go to the restaurant because all of a sudden it was like, oh, I need to pee, and I'm on the street, so you're going to try to find a place to go. And we were at Bertolt Brecht Strasse, and there was this theater called the Berliner Ensemble, and it's a very famous, and Bertolt Brecht was a great 20th century playwright, so I was wearing all my black clothes, and I walked in, looked at, saw some people, said, is there a restroom somewhere? You assume most people in Europe speak English, because my German was really non-existent. And they were very excited to see someone come in, and they're like, oh, where are you from? And they wanted to know little things about me, and wondered why I was there, and just a couple of the actors all came in and started talking to me, and that also was really interesting how it was unscripted and unplanned, and to walk in and yet you see how people flock to see different people, and that was also very memorable. And then we went to go see Fiddler on the Roof that night, and it seemed like they Soviet social realist it a little bit. It didn't really follow the script as I remember, but it was a good production. And then we went to a restaurant that night, and I remember there was this waitress. She had this black hair cut like this, and you're traveling. You're like, she is so pretty. You're like, I wish I could talk to her, but I don't know any German. So that's that.
Okay, that's nice.
But as we left that evening, we still had coins left because it was so inexpensive. We were going to restaurants and cafes, and went to theater production, and that $50 we still couldn't spend it all that day. That was very.
I have a question. Okay, going back to with the man at the church, the Polish man at the church, and how that was so that stood out for you throughout your entire trip, is that this one guy that he wasn't a tour guide, he wasn't anything, he was just this guy. He was there and he went over and he made a real impact on your trip. Do you think that it's better when you go onto a trip, if you go to Europe, is it better to go for the tours, with the designated tour guides who know what to say, you know all the facts, whatever, or is it better to kind of go explore on your own and go try and seek out people, or have them seek out you, who can give you a different perspective that's not the tour guide, that's more of how it really is? Which do you like?
Well, one of the things that back then when you would travel, there would be the tour guide books. Nowadays it's probably Rick Steves, and back then there was this book published by Harvard Publishing called Let's Go, and it had a lot of info on inexpensive places to stay and things like that. So you were kind of guided into some of the functional things you needed to know. But you should always bring with you, and that's why I think that sometimes going to travel when you haven't studied enough, it's kind of wasted. Then you might just spend all days going to the zoo or something. But with a little bit of study, and a lot of our history, and one of the things about studying our history is no matter where you go in the great cities of the world, there are things that you know and you've learned and you recognize, and you can just walk along and you don't have to be shown something. And one of the things I remember about being in Rome is walking away from the train station, I saw this church, and the facade was real familiar to me because it undulated. It was very Baroque, the way it undulated, and I remember thinking, I remember